The Atlanta Falcons had one of their worst days against the pass rush as an offense. Michael Penix could not connect with anyone. The O-line could not stop anyone. And Zac Robinson did not give his team many solutions to deal with this problem. We're going to break it all down here today on all Trey phases. Make sure to like and subscribe. For the most part, the 49ers kept it simple. They did run a couple of blitzes and simulated pressures, but we're going to see that they got away with rushing 4 for most of the night, and it started early. On this first play, we're going to see that it's just going to be a simple 4-man rush. Matthew Bergeron's going to get driven into Penix's lap and cause the pressure here. A couple of things that stood out to me as this play was going. Bijan up top. I get that this offense has like been really liking these choice routes, and I think that there has been a good benefit to them. But I think in this situation, he's just a little bit too slow figuring out what he's trying to do here. I understand there's a linebacker here. Ideally, I think he would just want to be a little sharper and cut in and sit between these two players. I think Penix is kind of, maybe hoping for that. It does not happen. And then by the time, Bijan does peel open, Penix has somebody in his face and he has to come out left here. I like that he does roll out. I thought that he had an opportunity at Drake London. I think he has the leverage here to make this throw. And I thought, that he could have given it a shot. He doesn't feel that comfortable, throws it deep down the field to Pitts, but never really has a fighting chance at that football. And so, I'm not an offensive line expert, but, the Falcons do a couple of things that you don't see a lot of other teams do across the league. And I think it led to some confusion. We're going to see here that Matthew Bergeron is going to come out and pull over here, and he's basically going to replace Wilkinson. Wilkinson's going to slide down in here because Chris Lindstrom is pulling to replace Bergeron, and I think it's to create some confusion, hold these guys and simulate some run action, hold the second level defenders. But what ends up happening here is we see a defender, passed off here incorrectly, and it ends up leading to a free rusher. Something else on this play that I thought was odd is Michael Penix kind of like 360 turns here. That's like an awkward motion for him to have to come and get all the way back around for his, being left-handed for his throwing motion, especially when it's clear to me that all the routes, everything is designed to go this way. So it kind of seems like the Falcons like really overcomplicated this play, and doesn't really help the quarterback out when under pressure. Not really too good of answers, and it's just another lost opportunity for this offense. The Falcons have started to become a little over-reliant on the Charlie Warner personal protector running back package, where he's just lined up in the backfield on passing plays. One thing that bugs me is that it's an obvious tell. That it's going to be a pass, so it limits the offense. And I just think that the Falcons could get more out of having a running back there, doing chip work, being able to get into the flat a little bit quicker, and that Warner would be more of a benefit to the offensive line and the overall pass protection plan if he was played more traditionally in line. But on this play, we're going to see that he is in the backfield, and Michael Penix is going to adjust to this double mug look, and that's these two linebackers here lined up in the A gap. So he's going to come over here and basically plant Warner right across from this linebacker. And this is how the Falcons have responded to this look since last year. I'm not a big fan of it. I think that it, one, kind of affects the vision of this blocker. I know it's supposed to simplify it, but if they run a stunt or do something like that, it muddies up the picture and it makes it harder to read. And I also think that it creates a clog and it takes away an escape lane for the quarterback. I think that's something that happens here on this play. And so we're going to see that Penix makes the adjustment. Looks like we might even have a blitz off the edge at the top. But 49ers bail. Yes, you can make the argument that maybe Penix could hit one of these in-breaking routes. I think that this is one of the few plays we'll see on film where Penix has the option to hit stuff like this over the middle. He doesn't rip it. He tries to step up, and it ends up being a sack. And, that's a tough rep. Ends up just being, a simple stunt that undoes them on a 4-man rush. And you see that Warner and Lindstrom kind of got clogged up, and it muddied up the picture there. And so, the Falcons, unfortunately, quarterback gets hit. and we have to waste a valuable down here. And I really just didn't like the plan from the start, and I think it's something that the Falcons need to adjust. Here we're going to see that the 49ers finally do blitz, and they're going to overload this side up top, and they're going to end up getting one man come free here. Penix is going to try and make an anticipatory throw to Drake London out here, who's running a corner route. Unfortunately, he's not able to get this in. This is a tough throw, no doubt. He's trying to hit that off of his back foot. It's a throw that we've seen quarterbacks make, but it's not an easy one. But something I want to point out, I mentioned the A-dot earlier. This is kind of what I'm talking about. When we look at where all these routes ended up, these are deep targets. And so, that there's been a lot of pressure just from 4-man rushes and things like that. So, you'd hope that you could start getting some things lower here. Unfortunately, Falcons just didn't really get anything in the intermediate zone until they started getting into the second half of this one. And here, there's nothing that Penix can do. Wilkinson is just cleanly beat. It's never good when you see your own offensive lineman, doing a Superman dive like that. Bryce Huff is able to get in there and affect the quarterback. And this is a game where Penix took a lot of hits. We know that he's dealing with a bone bruise now in his foot and ankle. And you just can't let the quarterback, take shots like that to his blind side. It's a tough rep. And it was a tough day for Wilkinson. Atlanta's going to have to figure something out to protect the quarterback. This was the play for me that I think was the most disappointing from Penix of the night. This was the intentional grounding. As this develops, you're going to see here that there is time and that, a nice pocket actually ends up developing here. Bryce Huff, for whatever, he bails and wants to come this way. And, that's fine. We're actually thinking like, okay, great. Everything is working this way. We're really trying to attack, from this hash, inside. We have to get a big play here. But unfortunately, Mike just does not really do a good job of feeling that. He goes north and almost back to the left, gets himself in trouble. There's nobody out there for him. This is a mental mistake that you just really can't have. It's one of those things where you just try to chalk it up to, young quarterback, inexperienced at this level. But, Mike has to be better here. And I'm sure he knows that as well. It's just an unfortunate situation that put the Falcons in a tough spot before half. So here again, we're going to see the Falcons using Charlie Warner in the backfield. I'm not really sure what the call is for him, but he seems to really hyperfixate on 53 down here at the line. And then, we're going to see, because Warner vacates this area, just leaves an open space for the blitzing slot defender there, who's going to come in and he's actually going to crash down. Warner doesn't even end up blocking anybody. And we see Penix get hit. Coming out of the half, it is good to see this adjustment. We've got, a lot better answers for blitz. We've got quicker routes opening up. Unfortunately, Mike just isn't able to get it there in time. This is, he does pump there, and, maybe he could have gotten it out of his progression starting here. He's looking this way to start. So I think, this defender really throws him off from getting to Pitts. But we like the depth of these routes much better than what we saw in the first half. This was considered a pressure, but, I think the O-line actually held up pretty well, considering, that this is a longer developing play. And Penix also delivers a very nice ball. Unfortunately, Darnell Mooney is just not able to come down with it. That's one you have to have. You're essentially going to flip the field here, and it would have been a big momentum swing for the offense. Penix does a really good job of delivering this football. That steps up into the pocket. You couldn't ask for a better rep from him. Receiver just has to catch the football. All right. Well, the intermediate routes did not last long. I understand that the Falcons, they have to score points at this point, but I think they'd be better served really, attacking the middle of the field. I understand that, you got to worry about the time, but you just haven't had a ton of success, going outside the numbers in this game. But we're going to see that they do here. And, from standpoint, Bijan doesn't really stick Bryce Huff well enough here. It's a pretty soft delivery, and Huff's able to turn the corner on Wilkinson, who you can see, he's leaning hard here. And Penix, again, like I mentioned earlier, he's taking hits, big hits in this game. This was fortunate. Penix is strong enough to hold on to the ball and actually get that counted as an incompletion and throw through that hit. There's a really tough play by him. It's a really good job not letting that be, a turnover, but have to do a better job there of executing that chip. But also there's just not, when he hits this foot, like this, his only option is really here. And, he definitely could have delivered the ball, but there has to be more than that. There has to be, we need to get somebody, threatening the middle over here. We need to get some better options in terms of depth. And the Falcons just didn't really do a good job of that. They had it for a couple of plays, but, outside of that, they really just kind of stuck with what they normally do. All right, so we're airing it out at this point. The defense knows it. Penix has to stand in the pocket a little bit longer to deliver some of these footballs, and he does his best here. Just tries to get this to the sideline from Drake. Wilkinson, another brutal rep. Something that bothered me, this is like what the Carson Palmer injury looked like. Penix is now dealing with like a foot, ankle injury, whatever deal. That looked like, a textbook low hit on the quarterback to me. And I'm not like, saying I love to see penalties, but that's a rough hit for the quarterback to take. I feel like most QBs get that call, and Penix does what he can to at least just get that ball out of bounds. And unfortunately, on a gotta have it play here, Falcons aren't able to deliver. Chris Lindstrom is not able to have a clean exchange with Ryan Newzeal on the stunt that we're going to see the 49ers run here in the middle. And then it also just looks like Penix and London aren't on the same page. London, when he gets to the top of his route, he breaks in. Penix throws a ball where it looks like he wants him to sit. He is trying to throw under pressure here. But the Falcons, unfortunately, this play kind of characterizes their day as a group. Quarterback and receivers not on the same page. Not a lot of great options or answers for pressure, and the O-line just not being able to execute. And so it's unfortunate to see a performance like that where the quarterback's getting hit a ton, but it happens. And this team, there are adjustments that they can make to improve this pass protection so that it gets back to what we were seeing in the early weeks. The offense did not perform the way it wanted to against the pass rush. Didn't perform the way it wanted to, period, in this game against the 49ers. But there are adjustments the team can make that I think would go a long way towards helping their offensive line. I think Charlie Warner should be, an inline tight end being used in a traditional way. I think that would be, a lot more beneficial to Elijah Wilkinson, who's clearly struggling right now, and I think needs all the support that he can get from the offense. Something else that the Falcons should just really need to start ramping up and figuring out is, a middle of the field passing attack. We need to see more concepts that go at the middle of the field. Defenses are leaving it open at this point because they know that the Falcons just don't really go after that area. So, if the Falcons continue to avoid it, defenses are going to be able to take advantage of it. And, it just doesn't really, make sense anymore because this is, a clear weakness of the offense. And we haven't seen real attempts at increasing the volume or focusing on attacking that part of the field. And this is something that goes back to when Kirk Cousins was starting as well. And Kirk was a very efficient middle of the field thrower. So he was able to make do with the couple of concepts a game that he got. But right now, Penix is a young, developing quarterback, and he needs the volume. He needs the reps to have the confidence to rip those throws when they do present themselves, and we just aren't seeing that right now. And lastly, one of the biggest things the Falcons need to figure out is their play action game. They only ran 5 plays total, and only one of them was a net positive play, and that was a 3-yard completion to Drake London. The other 4 plays were incompletions. And, it's another thing that it just doesn't really make sense why it's not a part of this offense already. Everybody knows Bijan Robinson is the best weapon in the league. Being able to take advantage of his influence is probably the best way that you can neutralize another team's pass rush, and by making them stay honest and have to play you Like, you have the threat of running at them at any moment. But, the Falcons, they're very rigid, and, they don't do themselves any favors, and they make it easier for the defenses to be able to key on what's going on. They're not efficient at running play action when they do it. And it's a noted issue with this offense, and it's one that doesn't seem to be making any improvement. Thanks for tuning in to All Trey Phases. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. I don't think that the Falcons are cooked. I think that it was obviously a disappointing performance, but this team, has the ability to bounce back. We've seen them do that. But the issue is that this team has to stop bouncing back. They have to keep their momentum, and they have to be able to string together consistent, convincing wins. This team has been volatile going back to 2024, and a 500 record, I think, through 7 weeks also reflects that. You never really know who's going to show up, and so if the Falcons really want to keep their playoff hopes alive, they're going to have to get it together and be a more consistent team. There's a very winnable game this week against the Miami Dolphins, but after that, it's going to be a tough back-to-back against the New England Patriots and Indianapolis Colts. So it doesn't get easier from here, and the Falcons are going to have to figure out how they're going to become a more consistent football team. And thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed the episode.